So you and we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor era Tapestry. Lady Jane Boleyn had learned so much during her 8 years at court. She had been 13 when she arrived and did not know anything about court intrigue. Now she was a 21-year-old married lady. Her husband was the dashing 22-year-old George. They were the picture of newlywed perfection, if no one paid too much attention. Janie had not found herself with child yet. It was no wonder. George avoided alone time with Janie whenever possible. She had tried to make friends with Anne when she had returned, but Anne had more important issues to focus on. She was in a fully bloomed relationship with King Henry. When she was not with the king, she was whispering to George in a corner. They always stopped talking when Janie approached. It gnawed at her. Anne was playing with fire, and she could use as many friends as she could find. This was reckless behavior. This was how you turned up like Mary, or worse. Janie was a lady-in-waiting for Queen Catherine, and her sister-in-law was clearly a threat to the Queen's marriage. This was complicated at times, though the Queen did see that Anne was no friend to Janie. She mentioned to her once that she understood her loneliness. Anne had some kind of hold on the affections of many women's husbands. Janie had only nodded and finished with her duties. Mary had written that she had delivered her second baby with William. This time she had a boy, and she had named him Henry in honor of the king. Anne had publicly adored the name honoring the king, but Janie could see that it bothered her. It was just another reminder that before the king had been enamored with Anne, he had been enamored with Mary, and everyone still remembered that. The court was just as resplendent as Lady Anne Boleyn remembered. She had been allowed to return now that Henry Percy was safely married. It mattered not to Anne that he had been married. She had heard rumors that the marriage was not a happy one. She had a new admirer now. The king had been making advances. She did not think this relationship was going to go far. The king was married, and Anne worked for his wife. She could admit to herself that the attention was nice. Every time she saw Cardinal Wolsey, she seethed. It helped that the king was making advances that Wolsey seemed to have no idea about. He had shut down her last romantic interest, and he had no idea about her new one. Anne would see the troublesome cardinal fall if it was the last thing she did. At the age of 25, Anne did not feel like she had a lot of time to waste with the king, but the distraction from her last experience at court was welcomed. She had considered just having fun with King Henry and focusing on her own studies. It would be tricky, though. She was reading many books, but some of them were illegal to own in England. With the king randomly paying her attention, it felt dangerous. The danger was what intrigued Anne. It felt risky, and she felt brave. Cardinal Wolsey was just one more sign that the church needed reforming. The man was corrupt, strolling around court without a care in the world while he amassed much wealth. People would not want this if they knew how men like the cardinal held himself. In the spring of 1526, Lady Catherine Carey was expecting a new sibling for the first time. Her mother was spending her time in the family manor. She used to spend all of her time at court, but lately things had been too awkward for that. She did not realize yet, but her mother had a somewhat scandalous relationship with the king. It did not matter what the truth was. The rumors were everywhere. Mary Carey had spent several years at French court, and the rumors were that she had a scandalous relationship with the French king. After similar rumors at the English court, she was now casually referred to as the Great Whore. Kathy's mother was much more comfortable away from those rumors. Kathy's mother had become the mother of two on the 4th of March, 1526. William Carey was born and joined Kathy in her nursery. She had no ambitions to go to court, or anywhere really. Her world was her family, and she knew nothing else. As she fell asleep, she listened to her mother talk to one of her nurses about Anne and how reckless she was being. Mary Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk, was happy to be home and away from court. She had not been feeling well, and the clean air of the country was preferable. She had wanted to stay home with the children. The court was so full of intrigue and cunning, Mary felt like she could relax at home. King Henry had one daughter, and she was likely going to be the next queen in lieu of male heir. After Princess Mary, the next heir was Mary Brandon's son Henry. He was the only male heir descended from her father, King Henry VII, with the exception of King James V. Henry would never allow England to go to Scotland's king, so he was out. Mary sometimes struggled to prepare her son to potentially be a king without looking like a lady who wished her son could be the king. Spring 1526 found Princess Madeleine of Valois not well at all. The payment for the ransom of her father had been decided. Her father, King Francis, was coming home. The payment included several things too complicated for a 6-year-old to comprehend, but she was able to understand that part of that payment had been the exchange of her father with her older brothers, 8-year-old Prince Francis and 7-year-old Prince Henri. They had been sent to Spain to live as royal hostages with the emperor until their father paid his ransom in full. Madeleine had not lived with her brothers in a couple of years, but that did not mean she loved them any less. They were her older brothers, and she had already suffered so much loss. Louise and Charlotte had died. Francis and Henri were captives. Madeleine and Margaret lived in the valley with their Aunt Marguerite, and 4-year-old Charles still lived with their father. Ever since their mother, Queen Claude, had died, everything had felt so fractured. Now, with Francis and Henri so far away, Madeleine was not sure how they would find a way to come together again. Their life in Spain was a mystery. They were not allowed to visit or even write home. They would have to tell Madeleine how they survived later. For now, she just prayed for their safety and tried to put this misery out of her head. In the chill of February, Princess Mary Tudor had turned 10 years old. Something about being 10 made her feel grown like 9 never had. She was still living up at Ludlow Castle, and now it felt less cold. Lady Pole had done a grand job making the castle feel like home. Lady Pole had lived here before. She had called Ludlow home for about 6 months, serving Mary's lady mother when she was newly wed with Uncle Arthur, before he had died. Together, the ladies were breathing new life into this place. Mary's betrothal to Emperor Charles had been called off after the Battle of Pavia. Mary's father had not assisted the emperor long enough to participate in that battle, and the emperor did not feel like the alliance was being respected. Emperor Charles V had replaced Mary faster than she expected. The replacement bride was not only Mary's cousin, she was also Charles' cousin. All of their mothers were sisters. The new bride was 22-year-old Princess Isabella of Portugal. She was the daughter of Mary's Aunt Maria. Maria was 9 years past now, but she had been the sister of Mary's mother, Catherine, and Charles' mother, Juana. Isabella was grown, and Charles did not have to delay his marriage with her. Isabella also came with a much higher dowry than Mary. This arrangement would solve a lot of the emperor's financial issues due to all of the wars he had participated in. If Mary was not disappointed about not becoming the empress, she would probably agree that this was a better match in almost every way for Charles. In the summer of 1526, 11-year-old Lady Marie of Guise sometimes worried that God did not hear her as clearly as she wished he could. She was a godly girl, a good girl, and she had dedicated over half her life to God at a convent where she resided with her grandmother. She had prayed so hard last year for God to show the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor that he should release the also Catholic King of France. That had happened, but King Francis could not afford his ransom. He was released, but as collateral for his unpaid ransom he had given the emperor his 2 oldest sons. Marie's heart had broken for the young princes. They were only 7 and 8 years old. Maria thought of her own 7-year-old little brother, Francis. Francis had been named for the king, and his 8-year-old son also Francis. Prince Francis was now a captive in Spain with his younger brother Henri. Marie thought Spain must be an awful place, and thought God must have known this was not what she was praying for. In happier news from home, Marie's mother had just added another baby to the Guise brood. She had a new little brother named Claude, named for her own Lord Father. Marie had 5 siblings now, 3 brothers and 2 sisters. It was strange to her because she felt like an only child. She had lived with the sisters and her lady grandmother for so long. The other 5 children lived at home with her parents. It was good to have a higher calling, because otherwise this might start to feel quite unfair. Marie dreamed sometimes about a life at home. When she did, she was always 5 years old. It was all she had known. At 11, she wondered if a betrothal would be coming soon. She was not included in these decisions. Would she just receive a letter someday with news of her marriage? She decided to patiently wait for news. That is what godly girls did. As Lady Catherine Parr turned 14, she felt bored. She still lived at home with the staff and her siblings. She had read so many books, but there was never any time to experience anything. Some of her friends were married, and a couple were expecting children. Marriage and childbirth were not the only experiences Kat wanted to have. Sometimes she felt envy for her mother. She was at court most of the year. Maud was able to see the important people and hear the important things. Last time her mother had come home, she had spoken to Kat about who she may like to marry. What qualities were important? Kat was without an answer. How was she to know what qualities she wanted in a husband? Maud said she would do her best and had gone back to court. Kat had stayed at home. Even Princess Mary was able to see new things. She was living in Wales. Kat would like to move somewhere new for a while. She would even like to go to Ludlow if she were invited. Instead, she sat at the windows and watched the people on the streets. She imagined where they were going and the conversations they would have. Soon, she would be grown, and she would find a way to be a person going places with things to say. At the close of summer 1526, Lady Jane Seymour was watching the familiar bustle of her household preparing for a long visit from the king. King Henry often hunted near Wolf Hall and had visited on occasion. That did not lessen the excitement on every subsequent visit. Jane watched as the cooks prepared meats and various sweets for anyone that may require it in the king's entourage. The entire manor smelled of fresh baked bread. Jane was 18, and no progress had been made with William Dormer's mother. She was still against the match, and Jane was still free to marry, as the king and his men enjoyed leisure time away from the court, and her father made deals behind closed doors. Jane watched them with focus. They seemed so different from the people Jane usually associated with. She wished the ladies of the court had joined the king along with the queen, but this was not that kind of visit. This was a trip for just men. They had important issues to discuss. There was no time for socializing. Jane did not know what this business was, but polite ladies never eavesdropped. But she could tell by their tones that it was serious. Her lady mother would send her in occasionally with food or drink. They were always serious and barely noticed she had entered. Her mother had even suggested she wear her best gown to distinguish her from the staff. Before the men left Wolf Hall, Jane had devised a plan. She would get an invitation to court. She would assist Queen Catherine, and she would impress William Dormer's mother. In the autumn of 1526, the finishing touches were being completed for the betrothal of 14-year-old Princessin Sibylla to 23-year-old John Friedrich, the eldest son of the Elector of Saxony. This marriage would mean that Sibylla would in time become Electra's consort. This was all very exciting for her sister, Princess Anna von Jülich-Liebenberg, but their mother, Maria, held strong concerns. Her daughter's betrothed was not Catholic. Even worse, he was Lutheran. He had been writing letters to Martin Luther for some time. They seemed to be friends, or at least friendly. Maria did not approve, but John had assured her that this was in the best interest of their principality. The people had been changing. They were not unwaveringly Catholic. The emperor was very Catholic, and the people had started turning on him and the Pope. John needed to ally with Protestants to show not only support, but also gain some allies in case he needed backup. The emperor had a large army, and if things turned bad, John would need new friends. He assured her that Sibylla would be in good hands, and that she had been trained for this. Maria had no choice. Sibylla would be married, in mere months, to a Lutheran, just after she turned 15. Anna did not pay much mind to who her sister would marry. Her parents did not often agree, and that had worked out just fine. She did think she would miss the serious Sibylla when she left for Saxony, but for now she was enjoying seeing her new dresses. Some of the dresses looked right out of a fairy tale. Anna was sure Sibylla would be a fantastic Electra's consort for Saxony. The autumn of 1526 was not being enjoyed by Margaret Tudor, Dowager Queen of Scots. Her son had been apprehended by her base and foul husband. He had made a deal with the other lords. They would take turns hosting the king. When it came time for the king to be moved, Archibald had refused to give up custody. He had double-crossed the double-crossers. Henry Stuart had told her the news. There had been a confrontation. 10,000 men had marched on the king's forces, attempting, they claimed, to rescue the king from the Douglas forces. Archibald was not keeping her son safe. King James was still only 14 years old, and 10,000 men were marching to liberate him. The men had failed. Meg's dastardly husband still had custody of her only son. Meg was feeling hopeless. Archibald was being rewarded. Archibald Douglas had been named Lord Warden of the Marches. He was in charge of border security between England and Scotland. His main job was stopping any border skirmishes that may pop up. He could not even stop 10,000 men from marching on their king. Meg was thankful that she had Henry Stuart to talk to. He understood the mess she was in, and he was a good listener and a good advisor. In the autumn chill, Lady Catherine Willoughby was full of melancholy. Kit's lord father had died. Baron William Willoughby had been touring his vast estates. During his travels he had become ill. There were just rumors as to the illness that had caused his demise. Kit was the only heir of her father's. She was now 7 years old, and the Baroness Willoughby. Baroness was a large job for a girl so young. Kit's mother Maria was often away at court with the Queen, and was not equipped for the job either. Kit had become a royal ward. She would still see her mother, but it was the king who had full say over where she lived, who she married, and how the barony was run. This legal status change did not occupy Kit's thoughts. She just missed her father and wished her mother was home more. She had been told by her nurses that she would be a grand baroness, but she was not so sure. In the early hours of the 1st of October, 1526, Ursula Pole labored to bring her second child into the world. Her first child, Henry, had died when he was just a young baby. This one, Ursula told herself, would live. The Staffords had fallen on hard times. Ursula's father-in-law had been executed 5 years past. He had plotted against the king, or at least that's how the stories went. Those stories would cost her husband his inheritance. As labor pains intensified, Ursula put all of her worries out of her head. There was no time for worry now. This baby would not wait. The pains were bittersweet. Ursula was looking forward to having a baby again, but she desperately missed baby Henry, and wondered if she had the means to keep this baby safe. Ursula's mother, Countess Maggie Pole, sent her a small stipend to help them survive. Even with that, they were falling behind on manor upkeep every day. The baby was born after hours of work. The midwife had whispered encouragement that this baby was strong. She was not wrong. Lady Dorothy Stafford was born, her cries loud and demanding. Ursula was tired, but thankful. This time she had a little girl. That meant a dowry. Ursula and Henry would need to start saving if this little girl was going to marry well. Ursula hoped her mother, the Countess, would consider this an issue that would require her attention. Ludlow had started to feel like home again to Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury. She had been so unsettled when she had first arrived. Arthur had only survived Wales for a few months before his constitution gave way. Maggie had kept Princess Mary bundled against the cold. She had ordered the fireplaces to always be lit. There was a strict regimen of tinctures and honeys to keep the princess strong. And it worked. The princess was thriving in Wales. Maggie had heard that Reginald had returned to England after a long time away. He had been studying abroad in France for the last 3 years. Maggie wished she could see him, but for now, knowing he was home was enough. Ursula had just survived her second pregnancy, and Maggie had breathed a sigh of relief at that news. Ursula had a baby girl that she had named Dorothy. Maggie had gotten so many new granddaughters recently, she could not wait till they were a bit older. She would regale them with tales of how she reared Princess Mary in her youth. Little girls love stories of princesses. Maggie would leave out the sad parts. Sad stories should have nothing to do with childhood. Nothing had changed in the Howard household. Nothing ever did. Lady Catherine Howard was just one of the brood. There were a lot of Howards, and they stuck together to survive. At 3, Kate had learned to fend mostly for herself. When there was food, she ate it. Sometimes, when she was too slow, her favorite sister would sneak extra for her. It was awful being the smallest, but she was getting stronger and faster every day. Joyce worked so hard to provide for her children. Whenever she made any money, she would hide it away from Edmund. Her father-in-law used to secretly slip her coins, which had helped, but he was dead now, and her brother-in-law was not so generous. As Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, was turning 41, she was starting to lose hope in her marriage. She thought that she had hit her lowest point last year, with all of the ceremonies and celebrations surrounding Henry's son with Bessie Blount. Her daughter had become aware of it all. Everyone else had already known, but it helped that her daughter had not. Catherine had suspected that Henry wanted a divorce then. Since then, she had only become more certain. Henry was not even hiding it now. He was done with Catherine. He did not believe she was capable of providing him with a son. She just had not given him the ability of remarriage because she would not die either. Catherine had been so hopeful when this marriage had begun. She imagined herself with Henry, surrounded by their children, fulfilling the dream of Camelot everyone had envisioned for her and Arthur. Instead, she was alone. Her only child was in Wales, and her husband was completely enamored with Anne Boleyn, the next lady of the court to catch his fancy. The never-ending stream of new mistresses was getting old. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.